All right, and joining us now is Liam McHugh, the studio host for Turner Sports. They cover the NHL, does a fantastic job. Previously was at NBC with the NHL, did some work with Notre Dame, NFL. He joins us now here on the Strom Sports Show. Liam, it's great to meet you. Steven Strom here. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Steven, it's great to meet you. Thanks for having me on.
Of course. Let's just first start, I guess. You're a New York guy. You're born on Long Island, went to Buffalo, went to Syracuse as well for your master's. You grew up an Islander fan. You still are an Islander fan. How crazy is it to think, you don't always start covering the sport that you grew up loving? And I know you had to go through different stints, places, but like, how cool is it to now kind of have that Mountain View top of, I get to talk what I love and host a show for the NHL?
It's fantastic. And when the NHL was leaving NBC, those were some tricky moments and didn't know what the future was going to hold, what I was going to be covering, and the fact that I still get to do this. And I still get to do it with a lot of guys that I love working with. Keith Jones is over from NBC, so it's Edzo, so it's Kenny, so it's Anson on our panel. So I don't know, it's a dream, but it's also weird too, because so now I live back on Long Island, and the last few years, where I live is very close to the Nassau Coliseum. Like it's like a 3-minute commute to the Nassau Coliseum. So I'm surrounded by Islanders fans. So and now that I'm older and certainly like less of a fan, but I'm watching my kids become fans, and I'm like certainly like a little bit more detached and objective. We just had the Islanders on yesterday, and I basically said, I was like, well, they're done. They're not making the playoffs. And the amount of people that I have to like run into today who are going to tell me that they have like a 1.5% chance, and that I should have said that on the air. It'll be nonstop, but it's really cool, and I think it's been a lot of fun to be able to do something you love. And I think the biggest thing is sports is fun regardless. You got to love the people you work with, and the people I work with are tremendous.
You've done multiple sports. We talked about football. We talked about the soccer, the Olympics. You're solely doing hockey now. Have you felt a difference just being able to fully immerse yourself into the sport and kind of create even more of a confidence when you're on air?
It's very different. Yeah. I mean, I love the fact that creatively I've a lot more say in what we're doing now. And because of that, I think it just comes off a little bit more genuine. I bounced around a lot at NBC, and I love that, and I get invaluable experience doing that. And I still enjoy the variety of it, but I just love the idea that day in, day out, like I cover just this. I have conversations with my analysts like 2 or 3 times a week before a show, where we're just shooting texts to each other about, what's coming up. And it feels a lot more conversational at this point, because I'm constantly having these conversations rather than saying like, all right, hang on, I got to talk to this guy about football, or I got to plan this show about college football. And I love doing that, but I think right now it just feels like it's a deeper connection with the audience as well, because I think they know that like, all right, this isn't a guy who like next week's going to be, hosting the Tour de France, or like next week is going to be hosting Premier League. It's like, this is the person that I rely on,
you're synonymous to the sport.
And I like that now. I don't know that I did when I first started. I loved the idea of bouncing around. I wanted to do as many different sports as I could. But I think now that I'm older, like I like being ingrained in this. And but I also like the idea that, because I did other sports, I have an outsider's take in some ways. I didn't grow up playing hockey. I grew up on Long Island, and my parents were from Brooklyn and Queens. And I remember the Islanders were great when I was a kid, winning 4 cups in a row. And I'm like, I want to play hockey. And my parents were like, hockey? They're like, where we live in New York, like that's for rich kids in New York. Like that's not what we're doing here. And it's changed a bit, but not that much. In New York, it's different. In Minnesota, it's different. My wife grew up in northern Minnesota. Like you put the skates on, you went outside and played, but that wasn't the case where I grew up. So, I have a little different take on things, and I think it's good to be able to bounce that off with guys who are so deeply ingrained in the fiber of the sport and there's still a respect.
You grew up a sports fan. Did you know right away that you wanted to do broadcast, or did you teeter with different careers? How young did you know that you wanted to be a broadcaster?
No, I definitely don't have one of those stories where it's like, I got cut by the JV team, so I took a microphone and I started calling. No, I was kind of delusional. I thought I'd be an athlete. I played sports in college, not well, but I played them, and I thought it would take me somewhere.
What did you play?
I was a writer. I played soccer, but I grew up playing a ton of basketball as well. For some reason, I thought that was going to happen. I tell people now, actually, because St. Peter's was in the news, obviously with the run they went on. that I was at a basketball camp. I was at 5-star basketball camp, not to brag. Then again, anyone who paid their money could go. So I went and I thought I was good. And someone said, "Hey, you got to see this kid, Shaheen Holloway. He plays for St. Pat's. He's from Queens. You got to check him out. He's at the camp." And I was like, "Oh, okay." Like, he's dominating. So I went over to court to watch him. Like, what is this kid, like 6'8", 6'9"? And they're like, "No, he's like your height, maybe like an inch shorter." I'm like, "Oh God." I'm like, so this isn't gonna happen for me. Yeah. So, but after that, I went into, when I was in college, and I realized I needed to find something else, and I love storytelling, and I loved the stories behind the athletes. So I got into writing, and I really thought that was going to be it for me. But I always had kind of an itch that I wanted to at least try broadcasting.
Yep.
And luckily, I had some editors throughout the years. I worked at Newsday in New York, and I worked briefly at ESPN Magazine as a researcher on my way up. And there were editors there who either were sort of giving me the hint that it wasn't going to happen for writing and I should try something else, or were, I like to think they were suggesting that I'd be good at broadcasting,
Sure,
that I should try something else. But I think they kind of saw the writing on the wall with newspapers and with magazines as well, that they were shrinking, they were going away. We didn't know what the job market was going to be. And they're like, if you are looking to try something, you should do it. And it wasn't going to happen for me in writing. And this turned out to be a much, much better fit.
it's so weird because I think a lot of broadcasters, I guess I shouldn't assume, but at least for me, like, I played college basketball at Kane, and I wanted to stay in sports. I didn't know how I was going to do it, but it started with the journalism, right? It started with pen to paper. But then once you get that microphone in front of you, I was like, I could say stuff a lot easier and better than me writing on paper. And listen, I mean, our connection is Michael Russo now. I mean, his fingers are like, I mean, he's a phenomenal writer, but at some point, he loves a podcast. You love to, talk. And I think that's a big reason why I transitioned into broadcasting, is because it felt a little bit more organic and it felt a little bit more comforting getting in front of a mic rather than spending hours on paper.
Yeah, I think there's something to that also. And I know that when I was writing, there was an anxiety that it was like,
Sure,
this is permanent. It's down there. If there is a mistake, if there is an error, it's just there for everyone to see. I don't come on in the post game and say like, "Oh, I misspoke in the second intermission." I can correct it immediately right here in real time.
yeah.
And there was the idea of, like, with beat writing, it was just, I saw it from older professional beat writers, because I was coming up, and when I was at Newsday, I was covering mostly like high school, local colleges, and the pressure wasn't great. But Newsday at that time was a bigger newspaper, and it was competing with the Post and the Daily News and the Times for breaking stories about the Mets, about the Knicks, about the Rangers, about the Islanders. And if someone beat you to that story, like, I saw the pressure that these reporters felt. And I just, I think there's a different type of pressure, obviously, of being on air.
Sure.
But I don't feel it as acutely as I did when I was reporting. There was an anxiety that came with that some people, it fuels them and they get excited and they love it. For me, it did not. I like to, but I love the idea when we're on air and when it's just conversational and I can sort of get my analysts to forget that they're on TV. That's the best for me.
Liam McHugh with us now. Perfect segue into what I wanted to get into, because I wanted to get into really into that studio show that you guys do. And you're at TNT. You are with the greatest studio show of all time, with the in my opinion, with the NBA side, with Kenny, Chuck, and Ernie. And I think you guys are really starting to have that similar feel of just kind of dudes watching games. Like you talked about a little bit, just like you want it to seem like you're at a bar and you're just having conversation. You want to let your analysts kind of go. How do you try and create your own identity as a show when you have arguably the greatest, studio show at the same company with you?
Yeah, I think it could have been intimidating, right? And it could have been the type of thing where we were brought in and Turner said, "Hey, this is literally what we're trying to replicate." But they also came in and said, "Hey, we want you guys to find your way, find chemistry. This is sort of our vibe and our style. And now it's up to you guys to sort of mold yourself within that." If it was as simple as replicating that, every studio show would just do it. They simply would. They throw guys out there and attempt to do that. But it's about a chemistry. And I will say this. I was surprised at how early we got a chemistry and got a real feel for each other. That doesn't happen very often. I knew Anson for a long time, so that helped, and there was a trust there. And I knew Rick Tocchet a little bit. But Gretzky and I just met briefly. Biz and I sort of knew each other online, but not in person. And it's been surprisingly easy, because really there's no ego. Everyone communicates. everyone it wouldn't work also. Like we bust on Biz, we bust on Talk, but it wouldn't work if you could only chirp those guys.
Yeah.
If you have to be able to chirp Gretzky, and he wants that. And to get that feel right away from him, and the fact that he wanted to give it back to guys, it opened up the entire show. It opened up everything, because now it's organic. We're not planning gags. We're not planning to be funny. It's just sort of like you heard something, you reacted, and now the conversation's going in a different direction. And the cool thing is, I think where in the past I would have been inclined, or maybe it would have been suggested, like, hey, try to steer things back on the tracks here. Don't veer off. Now, whenever I hear something that just interests me, whether it's way off topic, whether it's beyond hockey, if it just speaks to me, we go with it. And it doesn't mean it always works, but when it does work, I think it's the thing you remember about the broadcast. And I love that because, also if someone screws up, which I love, like the worst thing on TV is when someone clearly screws something up and no one addresses it and it's just hanging in the air. It's terrible. Like let someone screw up and let everyone call that person out for screwing up and just own it and laugh about it. And I love it. It's spontaneous, it's organic, and you don't have to sit there and edit a lot. You can just go with it, which is cool.
So a curious question that I had, this is probably one I'm like most excited for. Back in 2013, you're hosting NHL Live and Mike Milbury is going in on Alexander Ovechkin. As a host, what's going through your mind as a broadcaster? Are you trying to just sit there and let him finish? You know that there's going to be some backlash. Like, kind of give me like what's going through your mind during that time.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting because it's fairly early on. And Mike and I actually, like, we had a really good rapport and a really good working relationship because, I like the fact that he had a varied background as a player, GM, and coach, and that he did have strong opinions, and I wanted those opinions. But yeah, you do wonder, like, because he was going and going and going. You're like, where's it going to stop? And is there a but? Like, is there a but? He's like the greatest goal scorer in the game, so you live with it. Like, is that going to come in there? So like, you're sitting there and you're waiting for it to finish because like you have to sit there and add context. You're like, yeah, well, okay, if you think he's one dimensional, like the one dimension's pretty important, right? Like scoring the goals is a fairly important dimension to have, even if you are just one dimensional. And I think the thing with Mike, where we did get along is he knew that I was going to push back, and I wasn't going to push back on too much of the like inside hockey details. But if it was just sort of common sense, I'm listening to you, I'm not sure I love that argument, like I am going to push back on that. And the hardest part with Mike was that if he would make that point and the producer's in my ear and he's like, we got 20 seconds. I'm like, great, I'll have like 15 seconds to say something again. And then Mike talks for 19 and a half seconds. And I'm like, we're out of time. And like, we get the break and the game starts and people like lose their minds because we didn't address any of the things he said. And we had a few of those moments. But I like people that are going to keep me on my toes. And I know that not everything that Mike said was, listen, people didn't love everything he said, and he had his own opinions and they were strong, but I like people who are going to answer a question honestly and give their full opinion. I don't think Mike ever gave an opinion that he didn't believe in. And I will say that I think I have guys now, and I love Biz for this too, where I can ask him a very basic question and have no idea what the answer is going to be. Like, no idea. I should, if I ask basically 95 other analysts this question, I'll have a pretty good sense of how they're answering. Biz, I have no idea where he's going to go with it, but it's going to be interesting. And so after that, it's really just about sitting there, ask the question, don't tune them out, listen to every word they say, because you're going to get grilled about it somewhere along the line.
I highly suggest tuning in here, even if you're not a hockey fan, man. Yeah, check it out, TNT. Turner's done a great job here. Liam McHugh, the host of the pregame show, postgame show. Let me do last one because this is a Minnesota-based pod. Listen, I've been around some wild teams. My most exciting one was probably Bruce Boudreau's first year, and we went into the playoffs. We played St. Louis, and then Jake Allen had the series of his life. A couple years before that, we pushed Colorado to Game 7. I think it was Niederreiter that scored an OT. I got a good memory. This year, Liam, I like this team this year, and especially with the goalies now with Marc-Andre Fleury and Talbot. Give me your opinion now of the Minnesota Wild. How excited should we be going into the postseason?
I love this team. Love this team. We picked because we have the Final Four at Turner now. we picked an early Final Four, and I have the Minnesota Wild in there. I do not have the Colorado Avalanche. I have the Flames and the Wild in the Western Conference Final. I think the Fleury edition is massive. It cannot, it can't be overstated at this point. He has a huge influence on a team, not only in what he does in the net, but what he does as a leader and what he does as a teammate. And the fact that Talbot immediately reached out to him tells you that Talbot's a good teammate. He wants to win. And that Fleury is the type of teammate that you want there, even if you're splitting time, even if he's taking time away from you. Kirill Kaprizov is a top 10 player in the world right now. They're exciting. This is the difference, right, with the Minnesota Wild. There were some teams that could grind you away, okay? They are not only good, but they're fun to watch. And they have Foligno, they have Delorier, they have guys you don't want to mess with at all. Guys that are going to make you think twice before you take a hit at any of these stars. I like this team a lot. There's a ton of energy. They just beat up the Washington Capitals last night. This is, to me, this is a conference championship type team. And I think the cool thing going forward, I mean, we'll see what happens with Fleury. I do think the core, this is a good team for a long time, which is great. And I love it because that fan base deserves it. Knowledgeable, passionate. I know the Minnesota State hockey tournament in high school is like an enormous thing. It should not be the biggest thing. The Wild in the playoffs making a deep run should be the biggest thing. I don't know. I'm pumped, and I'm not just saying that because I'm on a Minnesota-based podcast, and then I'm just gonna. This is not a Keith Jones. Keith Jones does this all the time. Go back and check the tapes. Whenever he's on a regional network, he'll tell you how great your team is.
Pumps
He'll
him
go
up.
to the next region and be like, "All right, that team's garbage, and they're gonna lose." So I will say this on other podcasts.
Love it. And Billy G, I'm sure you know Billy G. He's done a phenomenal job just navigating the cap. I mean, you talk about this summer, the Parisian Suter buyouts.
Yep.
I mean, that was going to be, and it is going to be cap hell. How he has managed this team, man, he's got to get a ton of praise around that league.
He deserves it. He absolutely deserves it. I think there's a good chance he could be GM of the year. His relationship with Fleury is a big reason why Fleury felt comfortable enough to go there. Because I think at that time, Fleury had a few criteria, right? He wanted to go a place that his family felt comfortable, wanted to go a place that could win, and also wanted to go a place that wasn't uncomfortable in terms of his legacy. So the Caps were out, right? He wasn't going to be the guy shaking hands after they eliminated the Pens. He didn't want that. But I looked at teams that needed goaltending, and I thought, well, what about the Leafs? And I think he looked at Minnesota as, you know what, in the West, if I join Minnesota, there's a better chance of winning. And I think the tipping point of that, like if he's on that fine line of do I stay, do I go, do I look at other teams? I think that Guerin relationship was massive. And he's done a dynamite job. They're a fun team, an exciting team, and a team that'll hit you in the mouth. So I don't think you can ask for much more if you're a Wild fan at this point.
Hey, Liam, I really appreciate you jumping on with me today. Follow him on Twitter at Liam_McHugh. Again, check out the pregame show. Turner Sports TNT does a great job with the NHL. Thank you again, Liam. It's been a pleasure. Maybe we'll get you back on here for the NHL playoffs in a couple of weeks.
All right. Sounds great. Thanks for having me on.